Hey,
Hi, nice to meet you, Caitlin. I'm Christine.
nice to meet you.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good. I guess to get started, I would like to ask you to say your name, introduce yourself, where you're from, and what your personal background is.
My name's Caitlin McCormack. I'm 32, I think. I was born in New Jersey. I was raised in central New Jersey in kind of a rural area that doesn't really exist anymore. It's been very built up. And I grew up with two artist parents in a very low income household. So I kind of had to make a lot of my own toys as a kid. And I went to college in Philly. I moved here after never having been here before in my entire life because the brothers Quay, were my idols, went to University of the Arts. I have a BFA in illustration, which I thought I was going to pursue until after graduating. I was in kind of a period of burnout and some grief following the loss of my grandparents. And that's when I started to create fiber-based osteological specimens.
I also love the Quay brothers.
They're so great.
So wonderful. If you could talk a little bit about your art practice, what it looks like, and maybe even discuss some of the pieces that you submitted.
So typically my process starts with a museum visit. If possible, I'll go to the Mutter Museum or the Wagner Free Institute, or I'll use a museum trip as like an excuse to visit a city somewhere else. And I will observe a specimen for a really long time. And then I'll do a series of sketches from memory, because a lot of my work is about how the authenticity of a memory kind of warps as time goes by. And it's about that process. And then I use the sketch, which is deviated from the authentic kind of form of the creature, to separate the form into individual bones. And then I'll crochet those with a very tiny little hook and cotton string. And I stiffen that with glue and lay it out flat. And after many applications, and the pieces have achieved a level of hardness that's kind of like a fishbone, like brittle but also kind of sturdy. I'll sew them together and then add more glue. That's how they're made. Then I pin them in these velvet lined shadow boxes, or I'll install them under glass domes like specimens in a museum. They kind of return to that context. And lately I've been working on pieces that have to do with objects, everyday objects, or objects pertaining to specific nostalgic moments for me personally. And they're in various states of sort of transforming into other matter, like their purpose is becoming more inscrutable as time goes by. I think that's definitely a response to quarantine and forgetting, why you have a calculator at all, like things like that experience. And then I think one of the pieces that I submitted, I think it was called Coarse and Wet. It has mushrooms and fungi and ferns and much more muted colors, but there is color at all. Like I typically, up until fairly recently, have worked in kind of a binary color palette, and I've been making works that have rhizospheric elements to them for some reason. I think it all ties in with nostalgia and growing up in the woods and finding decaying animal remains and seeing how they mingle with rhizospheric debris. And I think it's kind of a move away from just this death-based work. There's, a lot of life in that process of decomposition. So yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot.
Could you tell us a little bit about one of your pieces called Storm of Uncles?
That's a piece that I exhibited with Paradigm Gallery and Studio in Queens Village. And it has, I think, something like 27 separate crocheted bird and rat skeletons, or at least sculptures that are very closely related to birds and rats. And they are layered in a sense that some of them are pinned to the black velvet base and some of them are adhered to a floating plexiglass layer, so that if you view it from different angles, they appear to be floating. It was a really large piece. I think it was one of the largest pieces I had made up until that point. It pertains to some things that were going on in my family, a lot of tension and chaos. Yeah, I guess that was my way of coping with those circumstances.
We really like both of those pieces. Actually, I was going to ask about Coarse and Wet, but you answered my question. So the next thing I'd like to ask is, how have you been staying creative during this time, during quarantine?
My practice day to day is pretty, similar to how it's been in quarantine. I really kind of am very apprehensive to say that, because there's so much horrible, devastating suffering going on in the world, and that's definitely affecting me. But as far as like the times that I do things throughout the day, the exception of like my post office frequency, that's definitely gone down. Everything is pretty much the same, so it hasn't affected my productivity. I have severe depression. I've been able to work while living with that. So this is, I'm probably more depressed now because I'm so isolated, but I've been able to make work. I think a thing that's really pushing me to do it is to just keep improving and honing in on specific nuances so that I can maybe bolster my portfolio to get funding so that I can live in my house. I just want to make better work so that people don't think I'm stupid. To be honest, that's what keeps me going.
One of the questions we also wanted to ask you is, how do you think art and artists are beneficial during this time?
I mean, art's beneficial during any kind of crisis. I can't imagine. I mean, there's an art response to basically every major or minor crisis that's happened in our civilization, and it's a very obvious coping mechanism. I can't really speak for other people, but as a person who makes things, I need to do it so that I have a repetitive process to engage in and to displace some of that anxiety. And as someone who also enjoys art, I think I probably, enjoy other art during more of the day than I spend making it, because I'm always checking my phone to see what my friend made or what is on display in this place, or, and so forth, just to visualize something different than the banal interior of your home. During this, you need to escape. There's an amount of escapism that's really necessary and is very easily accessible through art.
Totally agree, completely. What we're interested in next is maybe you could describe a dream project of yours, something that you've always wanted to work on.
Man, there's a lot of things. I kind of have always wanted to work on an installation that has multiple rooms, like a labyrinthine sort of experiential layout of different spaces that you're invited to investigate kind of in a stream of conscious manner, and maybe have it be inspired by various interiors that I'm familiar with throughout my life. I'd like to make fiber sculptures to install in various areas that you could kind of encounter, interact with. I also would love to work with neon. I would love to make illuminated work. That's a dream of mine. I don't know how I would do this, because this is so far removed from anything that I understand, because I'm a Luddite. And I grew up in a cabin in the woods, basically raised by wolves. I would love to make films, like weird comedy films. That's a huge part of me and what my proclivities are aligned with. And I think that would be really satisfying. I just don't really know how to engage in that kind of performative. As a shy person, I don't know how to engage in that kind of performative behavior.
I hope we get to see these dreams come true. I like the idea of illuminated pieces.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
One of the things we wanted to know is if you are inspired by an artist or excited by a specific artist right now.
I took part in spring break with In Liquid, and I discovered so many artists that I just can't stop thinking about. There was an artist named Max Colby whose work was just incredible. Their installation was beautiful. I love Lydia Ricci's miniatures. She makes miniature appliances and everyday items out of newspaper clippings and magazine clippings, various recycled ephemera. She's one of my favorite artists. Rose Nestler makes these bizarre sculptures that I really love, and she's a really nice person. Dance Doyle is another person. She's a textile artist who's doing the residency at Museum of Art and Design, and her weavings are really kind of devastating sometimes. Honestly, I think my favorite artists are Tim and Eric, the comedian. They're my favorite artists. I think they have made such a profound impact on how art has developed over the past almost 20 years. 20 years. I've been watching Tom Goes to the Mayor since I was 15. That's over half my life. They are massively important to me. So I think they're my favorite artists.
What book would you recommend to artists right now?
This is probably a really counterintuitive suggestion, but when I read that question, I was thinking about the Book of X by Sarah Rose Etter. It's pretty devastating, and it's a really lonely book. I don't know. I'm a person that I put salt in my own wounds pretty regularly. I like to make things a lot worse for myself. Not that reading this book will make anything worse for you. It's really imaginative and beautiful. Sarah is an amazing person and an amazing writer. It's if you feel like commiserating with someone in a narrative, there are experiences that this person has that not everyone has had, but I can profoundly relate to it. And it's, if you feel lonely and isolated, I think it would be a really relatable book to have in your library.
Thank you. Any words of advice that you would like to offer any artists, or words of advice you've been given?
I've been thinking about how, when my grandmother taught me how to crochet, I was like maybe 4 years old, and I had this giant hook, and she would have me generate these huge pieces of crocheted material, and then she would force me to unravel the entire thing. She'd tell me to rip it. And I guess that really embedded a very important lesson in me at a young age, that, you need to, it's okay to start from scratch. And it's good to know, it's good to be able to gauge when is a good time to just rip it up and start over.
Our last question actually is, if you could live with any piece of art by any artist, what would you pick to have? No, money's not an object. Yeah.
That's good. Wow. I think that this doesn't just my gut response is to say that right now, because of how sad and horrific everything is, I would love to live with something that's very bright. But this artist's work is simultaneously bright and also terrifying. Instead of living with a piece of art in my home, I would just like to live inside Rubber Pencil Devil by Alex DeCourt. I would just live in that house. I mean, I guess everyone could see me like naked because it's a see-through house, and that would be horrible. But I wish I could live in that sculpture. Just live in there. That'd
That's
be
awesome.
awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you so much for your time, Caitlin.
Thank you.
Real pleasure to chat with you. We're really happy to have you.
Thank
as
you,
part
guys.
of the grant.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
for picking me. I really appreciate it. It's so nice of you.
Thank
And
you
it's
for
an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, truly. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See ya.